My name is Tom King, and I'm the founder and CEO of Toolkit.law. We're here joined again by our webinars director and diverse attorney out of Islamabad, Pakistan, where much of the Toolkit.law development team is based. We're here with Gigi, who does criminal law and family law in a wide range. And for those of you who have followed many of my other national or regional webinars out of my jurisdiction here in the United States, you know that we've had Larry Bloomquist on many times before, and Larry is here having someone with an incredible amount of criminal experience, which he's handled over 150 jury trials, which would put him in the top 3 percentile or 2 percentile of licensed attorneys in America as far as trial experience, and also defense work, and also specializes in firearms related cases, which is how Larry and I met. Larry and I are good friends. Larry, it's good to be here with you again. We're just going to
Always,
go
Tom.
straight into it. I'm going to go ahead and share your screen. Our topic today within the section of child welfare, case intake and organization. You know what? There's nothing worse than not being organized when you start a case.
I definitely agree with that. Nothing's more important. Do you wanted me to go ahead and get started with that for that?
Yeah. Let's jump
So
straight into your help
what,
sheet. Let's talk
what I would
about
say is
case facts and status. Yeah.
the very first thing that we want to do whenever we pick up a case, whenever we get informed, and usually something like this is going to come in, you're going to get informed that there's a case of child neglect. You're going to or abuse. My experience is pretty extensive in abuse, neglect, sexual abuse. But you're going to get notified of this case, usually by, I'm going to kind of start from this perspective of a prosecutor, and then I'm going to throw in all the defense things as we go. But in this first thing, it's going to be pretty much the same. We're going to find out. We want to gather all the critical information. We want to know the who, what, when, and where. And then I always like to define success at the beginning. I want to understand what are our objectives. If I'm a child protective services attorney, am I trying to remove this child? Are we trying to get this kid reunited with his family? If I'm a prosecutor, are we going to successfully prosecute this person, and for what kind of crimes do we believe? The other thing is we want to develop some initial timelines and deadlines right away. Um, Understand that in these kind of cases, speed is really, really critical because you have a child that's potentially in danger. And so you got to get on it as quickly as possible.
Oftentimes it'll be a phone call, it'll be a Zoom call, it could be personal intake. I know you've literally gone out to hot crime scenes and started cases there. What's
Yeah.
special about where you do the intake?
Well, so one thing is one of the biggest things that we're going to keep track of this whole process is when we're dealing with a case with a kid, we want as few people talking to that kid as possible from the very beginning. Because one of the things that we have to do is, first of all, this is usually traumatic. We want the kid to have the minimum amount of trauma as possible. So oftentimes we're going to not talk to the child directly initially. We usually want to talk to our outcry witness or whoever has disclosed the abuse. And then what I really want to do is there's certain times when the police are going to have to take a very brief statement from the child, but I really don't want them interviewing the child. I want the child to go to the Child Advocacy Center to be interviewed there. So that's one of the biggest things that I want to do. But we still need to get all the pertinent information. So this is where we're taking the who, what, where, and when. We're taking our notes. We want to make sure that the child is safe. We need to decide, is there something we have to do immediately to protect the child? Do I have to go and get this child removed immediately? Do I have to get this person thrown in jail? What do I need to do? Do I need to do a protective order, or do I need to get bond conditions from the judge to ensure this? So that's really, really critical in this first phase, is identifying that. I want to know,
Do I
what
need
do
to
I
get
do?
do I need to get them to the emergency room?
Yes. Yeah. And like, for example, in a sexual assault or in a physical
Oh,
assault,
right.
the child may already be in the emergency room, or we need to get them to a sexual assault nurse examiner, or, we need to get medical personnel to evaluate if there's injuries. Nutrition is oftentimes a problem as well. So we need to make sure the child is being fed and is that's being taken care of. So that's our first concern.
And Larry, you know, from our perspective here at Toolkit.law, we're focused on the 80 countries with English-based legal systems. And of course,
Mhm.
you know, Larry, you and I have tried cases in the United States, me from a prosecutor perspective in the past, you from both sides. Gigi, you're on the other side of the world in Pakistan on the defense side, where you don't even have jury trials, right?
Yeah, yeah, we do.
even though even
Unfortunately,
though it's
we
an
really do.
even though it's a colonial English influenced um, criminal system, and of course, you know, culture wise, there may be questions that we can ask more easily, Gigi, than you can ask in your culture. Maybe I don't know, right? But
Absolutely. It's always more sensitive here in this part of the world, in South Asia. You cannot ask questions that might be considered as not accepted by society. Absolutely.
okay, let's
So
go
it
ahead.
makes it
Yeah,
makes child welfare cases a little difficult to deal with, especially in terms of sexual abuse or even just physical abuse in general.
let's go back, Larry. Let's jump back right into your help sheet. Let's pick up. We talk about removal, protective order, bond conditions. You covered that. Let's go ahead. You got about 3 minutes to finish the rest of this green column.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is get the child to the child interview at the Child Advocacy Center. So we have advocacy centers in Texas. We get the kid in there. They have trained interviewers. They're kind of trained to do an interview of a child. It's really important. If you do multiple interviews, you're really only setting up the defense because every time the kid makes a statement, he's going to say things a little different, and it's easy to attack that. And then also just to keep that kid calm and make sure that he understands what's going on. And these are trained people and they know they make the child safe to talk.
And
We need to know.
it's certainly helpful if you're in a country. You know, I heard you mention Texas. Remember, people aren't going to know what
Oh,
Texas
yeah.
is, right? So, but you know, depending in which country you're in, you know, we call them in many parts of the country CACs, right? Child
Yes.
Assessment Centers. People that specialize in doing this. You're not always going to have that luxury, Gigi, in your country, right? It may be a police officer who, as we would say in our part of the English vernacular, is a beat cop, right? They just have standard training. They don't have specialized training when they encounter some potentially horrible set of circumstances, Gigi.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think sometimes here, especially in terms of Pakistan, there are overlapping laws which also determine whether a child is actually a child. For example, we have conflicting laws in each province here where a child is not considered a child after the age of 16. But in some areas, they're not considered a child after the age of 18. So sometimes it's really conflicting to deal with these type of cases when they show up in courts.
Larry, let's focus on the last three boxes of the help sheet. Finish that out in green.
Yeah. So we want to meet the kids as quickly as possible. Once we've gotten the information, we need to identify their family structure and support, make sure we've got this person safe. We also need to figure out which family members are antagonistic to the child so that we can segregate them and stop information flowing to them. And we need to make the kid trust us. And one of the easiest ways for us to do is to meet the kid early, to get to know the kid. We try to bring him to the district attorney's office as quickly as possible. I have a team. I had a team of victim services people that met with them. I would then meet with them. We'd go in, sit in the courtroom. We would start to build trust because eventually this case is going to get really tough, and I need that kid to trust us to help us get through that. We need to identify which family members we can talk to and which ones we can't. We want to make sure that we have we don't want to play telephone. We want all of this information to come through in a way where the family is getting specific information from the same people all the time. And we need to, also we need to, like I said, work on keeping that offender separate from them and keeping influences of people that are going to try to, hurt the kids' psychiatric thing away from them. And then once we get that, we need to file the charges. And my rule is always go big, and you can always scale it back. We want to move quickly, but we need to take the time to do it right. And then we just
Certainly a prosecutor's perspective. Yeah.
exactly.
We'll
And then
start with
also,
capital. We'll start with capital murder, then we'll work down to jaywalking. right?
Exactly. Exactly. And then the other thing is use multiple counts because sometimes, like if a kid has an injury, we may not know what caused that injury. So, for example, a kid has a broken arm, but whether he was hit, we don't, whether he was hit with the pipe, whether he was picked up by his arm, all those things can matter. So, I want to have multiple counts so that I can cover all the bases so that we don't give him a room to slip out.
We're now switching to the right side of the column of page one as all of you follow along with your Toolkit.law help sheet packet for all of our 48 presentations. I think we actually included some extra help sheets, but we're going back here. The evidence column, right from the beginning. I don't know about you, Larry. I just have a policy. Whenever you do intake, that's when I start my witness list and my exhibit list. Right
Absolutely.
then.
Absolutely. Yeah, and knowing what evidence you're looking for and making sure you're going to plug it into what you're doing. Absolutely. Well, this CAC is just key. And having a trained interviewer that knows how to interview kids, and really it's the most important part is to ask these open-ended questions because we don't want to kids can be suggestible, so we have to be very careful about giving answers that may suggest the answer we're looking for. Also, be specific. So we had a case where I was the defense lawyer, and the interviewer kept saying, uh, Grandpa touched me on my front. Well, that's not specific because I said to the interviewer, I'm like, is this my front? Is this my front? Is down there my front? Is this my front? Yes. And they couldn't answer it because they have to be specific about the abuse that occurred, and you have to kind of pin the child down. And then also we want to get these sensory details. I think that's really critical. Um, School information, we want to get those records. We want to, see if we can talk to some staff people at the school. Oftentimes they're going to know a lot of information about the child that can be helpful. And then, you want to continue on with the sexual
Yeah,
assault?
absolutely. Yeah, keep going.
So another key member of the team that's going to get information for us is the sexual assault nurse examination or medical personnel. But in a sexual assault nurse examination, in a sexual abuse case, they're going to bring the kid in. They're going to give a history, and that's admissible under as for medical diagnosis and treatment. So it's not a hearsay statement. So that statement will be admissible. So we wanted to get that. It's another person that they usually trust medical people and having, and then if it's within 72 hours to 80 hours, we're going to want to do a DNA, try to find DNA, try to find any kinds of forensic evidence, any type of injuries that might be present. That can all be really key. So oftentimes these are just a key member and gets key information.
Gigi, I'm just curious, in Pakistan, if there's potential criminal cases, do you guys swab for DNA under the tongue? Do you do DNA
Yeah,
work?
we do. We do.
And when there's an alleged sexual assault, do you do usually allegedly against a female, do you have special exams for
Yes, we
them?
do. We do. So what the court usually does is it sends the person or the victim over to one specified or designated hospital and then has a panel. So let's say if it's a male victim, panel needs to have all males. And if it's a female victim, panel needs to have all females who then conduct the exam and then prepare the report that can be submitted in the court.
You bet. Okay, continuing on. Go ahead, Larry.
So, one of the other things that's really important is we want to get photographs of the scene. And like in a case like this, I want to know everything about the house. So not just where the abuse might have occurred, but I want to get as much information about that scene as we can while the police are there. Um, Also, CPS oftentimes will take photographs. We need to make sure we get all the photos of the injuries. We need to make sure we try to get a scale on that. Obviously, we want to get a medical exam done of the child, so oftentimes they'll take photographs as well. Any kind of photos of things that might be weapons, and then I really like to have photos of all the witnesses and stuff like that. Helps me identify who people are. Um, Nowadays phones are everywhere, so we want to get their phone, we want to get a search warrant, uh, we want to find out their social media. Oftentimes there's messages through these different social media platforms. You got to get on it early because sometimes these things will get deleted or, so you need to get on it early. So You got to use your grand jury subpoenas. You got to use your regular subpoenas if you need to, or whatever else you need to do. Most often, we would use a grand jury subpoena to get that information. Also, that's going to have geolocation data, which could be very helpful. If they were trying to say that wasn't me, I wasn't there. So
I
that
want to
all.
jump. I want to jump because we need to move on. But out of the box evidence. Let's talk about this. What's out of the box evidence?
So there are times when there's different. There's some times when we use our scanner. Obviously, a big part of it is getting the suspect in to talk to the police officer and try to get them to make admissions or confessions. But oftentimes they're not willing to do that, and so we have to think outside the box. So a good example would be a recorded phone call where we get the kid and put them on the phone. And the police are there listening, and they have a conversation. Or sometimes mom's on the phone with stepdad, and we record that and we can get good information. Another good one is polygraphs. Polygraphs themselves are not admissible, but the pre-interview and the post-interview are admissible. And so a lot
Ah,
of times what we'll do is we'll
I
bring them
never
in
knew that. That is so
yeah.
cool.
So you bring them in for a pre-interview, you get them to establish a bunch of different things, then you test them and you basically tell them that they're a liar. Then you bring them in for a post-interview and you confront them with their lies. That's admissible. So,
Whoa,
and a
whoa.
lot of times the guy will deny, do the poly, and then admit in the post-interview.
And you pray it's videotaped. Okay, let's
We
switch.
always videotape it. We
Yeah,
require it.
let's switch to the second side of your help sheet as we
Yeah.
stay on time. So when it comes to supporting and hostile witnesses, let's talk first about outcry witnesses and agency witnesses.
Okay. So first we got this outcry witnesses. And remember, there can be multiple outcry witnesses to abuse. So if they tell mom, dad, punched me, and then they tell grandma, dad kicked me, and then they tell their teacher that their dad branded them with a hot iron. All three of those are outcry witnesses, and so that's an exception to the hearsay rule where you can get evidence in what the child told them. So that's very powerful witnesses. We want to make sure we get their demeanor. We're going to talk to the supporting family members. We're going to talk to the police officers. The biggest thing is you got to pick witnesses that are going to help your case. You have limited amounts of time. You don't want to waste your time. So you're going to pick those witnesses that can really bring a lot of bang to the buck. Because I want to spend most of my time on my doctors, my nurses. I want to spend time with my kid, and the investigators that help move the case along.
Okay, let's talk about experts. A lot of times attorneys will shy away from using experts, sometimes because of cost, but other times because they're just really not experienced enough as courtroom litigators to really leverage a great expert.
Yeah. So look, the way that I deal with experts is I try to learn everything. I can't learn everything they know, but I can learn an incredible amount if I study. So I'll find out as much. I'll just start studying that topic so that I can ask the experts great questions, and so that I can cross-examine an expert. I want
I
to learn as
I,
much
I
about
had
it.
one lawyer said, I can't learn enough to be an expert, but I can learn enough to convince the jury that he's not.
Yeah. Well, so like if I'm doing a shaken baby case, I'm going to spend a tremendous amount learning all about cerebral injuries and stuff like that so that I can effectively address that expert. But look, these doctors, nurses, the CAC interviewers, a lot of times we'll bring them in to talk about child abuse in general, things that they know about. These are critical parts of your key, and this really helps us to focus in on that case. It's just critical. You need it. And if you're a defense lawyer, if you don't have the money, go ask your judge to give you money. Use Akey versus Oklahoma. Say, judge, they've got a doctor. I need a doctor.
Okay.
Let's talk about the victim because this is really, really important. Victim, if we haven't prepared our victim, we're leading a lamb to the slaughter. The amount of trust that we have, there's a lot of times we would do these trials, there would be a period of time when the kid would just break down on the stand, and we would have to go and take a break and go talk to them. And because they had trusted us, we'd had multiple contacts with them, it gave them the courage to continue to go on. Also understand that 90 to 95% of children are probably telling the abuse about what happened. but there are 5 to 10% that are lying to you. Okay. I've had that happen. I've had people admit to me on the eve of trial before I was to send someone to prison for I had a guy who was going to send him to prison probably for 60 years. And the eve before trial, one of the girls told me it didn't happen. And then I confronted the other girl and she admitted it didn't happen. So they are sometimes lying. Also, listen to your defense lawyer. Sometimes your defense lawyer is trying to tell you something and trying to point something out to you. And then you have to go back in and say, hey, are we missing something? Are we doing the right thing? Are we making it? I've had that happen where we've had defense attorneys point something out. And sure enough, that case I was just telling you about where we got the two girls to admit that they were lying. The defense attorney was trying to tell me that. And I said, am I missing something? And that's what made me go back in and do an additional interview.
Which is really a reason to be a humble, self-aware attorney capable of listening to the other side if they're if they're if they're playing fair, right? And
Yes.
because a lot of times we will just be antagonistic towards each other, especially if it's criminal law. But there are times when we really need to listen to the other side. I remember when I was a prosecutor, my boss got mad because I dismissed so many cases. I said, well, that's because so many of them were innocent.
Yeah. Well, and here's one of the things that I try to do as a defense lawyer. I try to go in and talk to the prosecutor and say, hey, before it gets indicted, let me come in and take a look at it. Let me come in and just give you my thoughts. And you'd be amazed at how many cases I get declined before they're ever prosecuted. And I'll do all kinds of work before a case is indicted. I'll go get my experts. I'll go get my investigators. We found evidence the police missed. I've had a ton of cases dismissed because I had the courage to go in and talk to the prosecutors, the experience to explain to them why there were problems with their case, and then the trust that they had in me to listen to me. And we've gotten a tremendous number of cases dismissed before the indictment.
Of course, it helps if you've previously worked for three different district attorneys' offices.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
you know,
Absolutely.
but the ballot, but we won't always, Gigi's going to be a much younger attorney, right? Gigi didn't benefit, at least up to this point in her career, of being in a prosecutorial role. But man, do we need to listen to the other side, be gracious to the other side, represent your client. But man, you can always learn something that even the other side may not have intended for you to learn.
Yeah,
Let's go.
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and focus on your last column as we have 7 minutes left, Larry. What a great help sheet. We're continuing with in the child welfare area with case intake and organization. Let's talk about one area that you are amazingly qualified in, talking about law enforcement and other agencies.
Yeah. So one of the things that I would tell you that's really key is this multidisciplinary team. So in the two main DA's office where I worked on these kind of cases, we had a multidisciplinary team. It's essential. I think every county needs to have that. It involves the DA, the police officers, the CAC interviewers, the Child Protective Services. We had our sane person coming in. We usually met once a month to staff our case. A lot of times we'd come up with unique things on ways to help the case move along, ask for certain things, ask an agency to do something for us. Hey, Child Protective Services, can you go out and check on this? What's the status of the house right now? Hey, officer, can we do that recorded phone call? You got to get buy-in from all these agencies. Child Protective Services, law enforcement. Usually, the problem is usually with law enforcement because what happens is the sheriff or the police chief's like, why am I going to send this guy over to sit in a meeting for 2 hours once a month when I could have him out on the street working cases? But they don't understand is the fish that we got in the net, we got to get them in the boat. And we can catch all the fish in the world, but if we don't get them in the boat, it doesn't matter. But you've got to get buy-in. You've got to go in and sit down with chief of police, sit down with the sheriff, and explain to them why it's so important. The other problem that you need is continuity with these agencies. So getting the same police officers. I really like it when I have a specialized detective that works these kind of cases. It makes a huge difference. And then having that same guy come to the multidisciplinary team all the time. They learn to know what I want. They learn to know what I need. The same thing with the child protective services people. That can be really hard because they tend to come and go.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
They tend to come and go. And then also getting these doctors, the Center of Miracles here in San Antonio, I worked with the doctors there on both sides. Autopsies. I've spent a lot of time as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney with all these medical examiners and stuff like that. And just having a chance to get to know them and getting their information, and it can really help you. And that's something that's going to just be super, super powerful.
Okay.
And if you're a defense lawyer, get your own doctor. If you need a doctor, don't be afraid to go ask the judge. Judge, they have a doctor. There's medical testimony. I need help. I need someone to look at this.
Okay,
Uh,
let's talk about hospitals, nurses, doctors. These are concepts across all the countries in the world.
yes.
What type of global advice would you give regarding hospitals and medical professionals?
Well, I think that you need to go and meet with these people. You need to develop a relationship for them. Medical providers oftentimes are focused in on the treatment of the child, which is very critical.
Of course.
But they also need to know that there is evidence to be had, and you need to get them, again, you kind of need their buy-in to some extent. You need them to go, hey, look, we understand that there's important information and we need to share that with people. And then also these medical professionals are busy. You got to kind of get in their ear and have them talk to you. Make them take the time to talk to you.
We've got about 3 minutes left. Let's go ahead and finish these boxes.
Yeah. So victim services. So when I was at the DA's office, I was really blessed. I had two amazing victim services teams in two different counties. And these just are critical because they're running the day-to-day interactions with the kid. I can't do it all the time because I'm in court most of the time. I'm working on other stuff. I'm going to bring them. To the courthouse with me every time I meet with a child. Especially sometimes if I'm a male and meeting with a female victim or even a male victim who's been perpetrated on by another male, having another person there is very key for building the trust with the child and making them understand that. Also, I think our prosecutors, just like we need specialized investigators, we need specialized prosecutors. These cases are different. You just can't have anybody pick one up and think they're going to do an amazing job. Whether you're a defense lawyer, if you've never tried one of these, you need to try one with somebody who's done a bunch of them. There are special rules of evidence. There's all kinds of things that you need to know. School teachers and nurses, these can be really important. I had a kid where a family had a little girl and she had an appendicitis and they refused to get her medical treatment and her appendix burst and she died. And some of the best evidence we got were from the school teachers, people that were there, the school nurse. She tried to tell the family that they needed to get help. And then finally, the counselors. Look, these children have been through something horrifically traumatic. And I have spent a lot of time with these kids, and they are all psychologically scarred. And one thing I will just tell you is you're going to be psychologically scarred too. If you do enough of these kind of cases, you're going to see so many horrible, horrible things. You're going to see people that have been physically or sexually abused. You're going to see videos of that abuse. You're going to see photos of that abuse. You're going to talk to them. And a real problem is secondary PTSD with people that work these cases. That includes police officers, child protective service workers, and finally defense lawyers.
I think of two things. I think there's still a case that I had as a prosecutor that 32 years later, I still get teared up when I talk about meeting with the parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
but the other thing I think about that I say to the younger attorneys, and I know, Larry, you'll feel the same way, you will never appreciate in your earlier years that almost every attorney and contact you make, not only does it form who you're going to be as a lawyer 15 or 20 or 30 years later, you're going to stay in contact with so many of those people, right, Larry?
yeah, absolutely. One thing I would say to our younger lawyers is this. There's a tendency to want to get yourself involved in everything right away. And a lot of times I'll have younger lawyers say, I need to see these bloody pictures. And I'm like, no, you don't. You're going to see plenty of those over the type of your career. Don't add to them. I worked on a case. I had one summer where I had 3 dead babies. They were all babies that were killed. We were prosecuting 3 different men for killing these babies, and it was incredibly horrific. And I had nightmares. It was very difficult. There's time. You're going to do enough of that. You don't need to rush to see other people's bad photos.
I just want to share one other thing that we have on Toolkit.law, and it is, and Larry, I don't know if you've seen this tool, but man, do I want you to see it. If you go to Toolkit.law and you go to our numbers section, which is what we call our calculators, we have firearms calculators. So whether it's ammunition caliber, a ballistics calculator, um, kinetic energy, the trajectory, if you need to see what the cartridges, anything about the cartridges, converting from caliber to metric, looking at understanding what the different sizes are of the cartridges. I'd really encourage you that if you deal with criminal law, go again to toolkit.law, go to our numbers section. We have over 800 calculators across about, I don't know, 30 different categories, and look at our firearms calculators. You might find those helpful. It's the greatest collection I've ever found of firearms calculators from a professional, from a modern legal professional's perspective. Anyway, Larry, any excuse I can have to do something with you professionally, I'm better because of it, my friend. Thank you
Well,
for joining us, and that concludes this presentation.
thank you.